Metabody program. And as Jaime pointed out, there are 36 different institutions and groups of people from 16 different countries in this. And each of us has different parts to play in the investigation of this project. I'm going to really oversimplify the project from what Jaime said here. Metabody is about exploring two things relative to digital technology and humans. One, on the one hand, it's about the negative aspects, which, according to the Metabody program, are the aspects of reduction of human emotion and human feelings and so forth into codified, replicable things that can be programmed. The positive side is that technology, when used properly, is a way to explore and expand the human humanity, and that's the second half of Metabody. So critique and then expand and improve with digital technology. So the title here, my title, represents the arc of my research for Metabody over the past 2.5 years, going from the critique to some ideas of expansion and embodiment at the end. Now, Jaime already went over Metabody and its aims. I took this paragraph, not really worth looking at now, because it's what I focused on in my research. Those were my cues. I split them up on the coming slides. You can see I started with a critique. First, I started with the critical assessment of addressing the problems inherent to contemporary culture of prediction and control that's necessary for implementing digital technology, that's especially humanoid digital technology. This is an example of what I was investigating. It's a robot called the iCat. It's invented and developed in Germany, pretty recent, and it is a robot that attempts to emote. And the exploration of creating robot emotion is something that's been going on since about 2002 at the MIT lab, Media Labs. It's a big desideratum of computer scientists, because if you can create emotional robots, especially robots that exhibit empathy, empathy is the ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, to be able to understand their emotions. If you can create a robot that could actually do that, then you would have a robot that could project emotions, understand emotions, and create bonds, real bonds with human beings. In order to do that, though, you have to codify human emotions. As Jaime was talking about, you reduce them. And here you have a total range of this robot of facial expressions of 6. The 6 basic emotions. Here's one: surprise, pleasure, puzzlement, and so forth. The problem is that up to now, scientists have only been able to create simulations of those emotions. So these robots can project the simulation of empathy, but not real empathy. However, human beings are highly affected by these robotic simulations. Studies show that humans actually form real bonds with robots in relationship, in response to the imitation emotions that robots exhibit. And this can be good because, for instance, dementia patients are comforted by a variety of fuzzy robots that have been invented to help therapize them. Here's an example of one. It's a baby harp seal robot. It wiggles and coos, and it's fuzzy. And when this dementia patient picks it up, it's clear that it's just wonderful for her to have this robot comfort her. Another example is teaching children. Empathetic robots, or fake empathetic robots, have been pretty valuable up to this point for the last 5 years in teaching children, especially those with special needs. For instance, autistic children react interestingly and ironically, interact better with robots than they do with people. And so you can train autistic children or educate them to interact with people, ironically, by having them interact with robots first. Now, here's an example with iCat. This is not a special needs child. In Portugal, another European funded grant had groups of elementary school kids learn to play chess with the iCat robot. The iCat robot was programmed. It has a bunch of sensory apparatus, and it has the facial expression. So it was trained to teach the child by, of course, robots all play chess just pretty well. it would play chess against the girl and then, or the student, and then if the student made a good move, it was programmed to give a response that was encouraging. And then the student would feel good about it and do more good moves, hopefully. If the student makes a bad move, the robot was programmed to respond accordingly, encouragingly, but also teach the child how to make a better move. Now, interestingly, there were only 4 ways it was programmed to do this. One of them, for instance, was to say, that move wasn't correct, try again, and have the child try it. Another interesting format was to cheat. The robot was supposed to make a purposely bad move in order to encourage the child to not get discouraged, and then tell the child what move might be possible to make a better move. All right, so the problem though, as you can see, there's reductivity, the critique here that Metabody is working with is that this is a reductive process. It also can possibly be manipulative. For instance, one of the fears ethically, and I've been approaching this through normative ethics, and one of the studies that's been done with these empathic robots shows that people get so attached to these robots that they are open and vulnerable to suggestion. For instance, this brings up an ethical problem. What if a manufacturer has a robot, it's fuzzy, they know people get attached to it, so they program it to 2 months or 3 months into the ownership to suggest buying another product from that manufacturer? Well, there's a great possibility of vulnerability and manipulation there. Another example of this is, and you have this reduction here, and here, this is a robot, it's a vacuum cleaner. It's a Roomba, I have 2 of them. People get very attached to these. Studies show that people actually develop emotions toward their robot that vacuums their room because they feel gratitude towards it. But they also think they're cute. They buy costumes online. They think of them as pets, and then they anthropomorphize them. Another study shows that some people actually feel such gratitude toward the robot that they give it a day off and turn it off so it can preserve its strength. Now, of course, if you know robots don't need a day off. They don't need gratitude. But people project that because they anthropomorphize the robot. So, this is a problem. This can even be dangerous. Another study I read was that soldiers in Afghanistan had problems with their bomb disposal robots. They wear out, they get faulty. But instead of turning those robots in and getting a new one, they would jealously keep these robots in the field. Why? Because they developed an attachment to them as a member of their unit. And then that would endanger their lives because they'd use these faulty robots to try to dispose of bombs. I'm going to go even further here. This is both a really exciting and very scary proposition, an experiment that's been carried out recently at USC, University of Southern California. A man named Theodore Berger, as a neuroengineering scientist there, has been able to encode the neural signals from the hippocampus, which is the seat of both memory and emotion in the human and in other mammals, into a chip. So he's managed to develop a language that talks back and forth here. So he can encode memories from a section of the hippocampus into the chip, then excise this portion of the hippocampus, put the chip in, and it's as if the person never forgot that memory. The memory's gone when it's excised, and then renewed when that chip is put in. Now, he's been doing this with rats and other mammals, and what he's found is, the wonderful thing about this is it's great for dementia patients. You could restore the memory of a dementia patient by encoding their memories before they lose them, and then as they lose their memories, simply put these chips into the hippocampus and renew the memories. The other problem, though, is he's found that if he runs a rat through a maze and it encodes that memory, then he downloads it to a chip. He can put that chip into another rat, rat B, and rat B can run the maze as well as this rat did, never having seen it. Why? Because he's implanted a false memory into another mammal. Now, the scary proposition there, obviously, is being implanted with false memories. That could also be wonderful because what if you have PTSD and you want the memory taken away? You slice it out and you put in a happy memory from somebody else who went to Paris last week. Now, this is all a weird convolution of happy and good stuff and bad and scary stuff, but it leads to it opens up possibilities, and that's what my other stages of research go. If you're interested more on this topic, by the way, I have an article just published in a book on computer science. I'll go back to this later. So I moved to more positive investigations of new relational and sociocultural paradigms possible from technology, and especially the idea of rethinking of personhood that's been going on lately, because made possible by advancing AI, and the extreme advancements in artificial intelligence have brought the possibility of human-like artificial intelligence, which brings then up the philosophical conundrum of how do you treat what amounts to a new species that's suddenly perceived as intelligent as us or close to it. What's the ethics behind that? And I investigate that. That actually is a huge topic in TV shows, movies, and literature. This is actually a still from The Outer Limits, an old TV show where this robot was invented by this scientist. It's sentient, and it creates all kinds of ethical conundrums in the city in which it lives. Most of the fictional representations don't really resolve this issue of how do we treat a new species that's intelligent. But the personhood movement has been thinking about that. There's another article, it should be coming out this year on that topic. All of these are thanking Metabody and related to Metabody. Not just that they have an association with other species. The whole idea, and this gets into the post-human and transhuman, when AI started, people realized that AI could possibly become sentient. They started looking around and realizing animals also were possibly more intelligent than we gave them credit for. And scientific studies were done that show that, in fact, the great apes, parrots, whales, are far more intelligent than we gave them credit for, and led to what's called, you can't see here, but the Non-Human Rights Project, a legal project based here on the East Coast with a bunch of lawyers and others that are trying to use precedents already set by the Supreme Court to call for legal personhood for intelligent species. Now, what they use is the idea of personhood is a legal concept. They're not saying that these animals are human or that robots could be human. They're saying that if they're close enough, if they're intelligent entities, they should have certain rights legally of personhood, like corporations do now. The Supreme Court said that corporations have personhood. They're legal, person-like entities. They're intelligent. They can vote. They can contribute money to political parties. So, using that precedent, the Non-Human Rights Project then said, great. Well, if they're entities, a corporation's an entity. It's a non-human entity, but it's an entity. So can an ape or a parrot be a non-human person? And in fact, they've managed to get these apes upstate free from their captivity for that reason. All right, so I talked about that at Yale in a recent conference on non-human personhood. And if you're interested, all of the articles and talks I've shown you are on academia.edu. And finally, and this is where I'm working on now, at Jaime's suggestion, I moved on to something more relevant to the architectural concept that he talked about. The end deliverable at end of year 5, that the material deliverable is a large room-size installation that's full of technology, but also is amorphous, constantly changing relative to the people that go through it and the way they interact with it. Now, we're still working on how to do that. He showed you some of the things that we're doing. He tasked me with investigating the idea of embodiment and expansion of that embodiment through technology. I start with Edwin Hutchins' notions of distributed cognition. Edwin Hutchins, an anthropologist from the late 20th century, came up with the idea of distributed cognition. His idea is that we humans don't think just with our brains. We think with our brains plus our tools, like this thing, and whether it be digital or non-digital tools, an abacus or a calculator, we use them as extensions of our brain. And in fact, our environment it also contributes tools to our cognition. So cognition is really distributed in his mind. He gives the example in his famous book called Cognition in the Wild, written in the 90s. And the whole book is about how naval vessels are steered. He says, as he points out, most of us think of the naval vessel being steered by the steersman or the navigator, and that's it. But in actuality, he points out it's navigator plus navigator's tools, plus the navigator's crew, the helmsman, for instance, and his assistant navigators and so forth, plus all the tools that are available on the ship, the rudder, the helm, all of it is an extension of the navigator. The cognition that takes place to make a turn on a naval vessel is a distributed cognition among tools and other people. So he goes from there he suggests a solution for John Searle, the philosopher's famous Chinese room thought experiment. Now, Searle's Chinese room thought experiment was an experiment where Searle was trying to point out that an entity that's intelligent, an entity that is intelligent may not be sentient. And he points out that if you lock a man in a room and he has nothing in that room but a book of rules to tell him how to translate characters, and every day somebody shows up with a sheet of paper with characters, Chinese characters written on it, and shoves that under the door, even though he can't read or understand those characters, he has this book of rules to help him translate those characters and give answers. He can shove answers back out the door and not understand what he's talking about. Now, what Hutchins says is Searle misstates this. He focuses too much on the man doing the interpreting with the book. He ignores the book, he ignores the room. He says, actually, the cognitive artifact here isn't the man, it's the whole environment. The room, the book, the man, all put together is doing an act of cognition. All right, so I recently published something on that in the Metabody journal, which is part of our project, but I'm still working on this idea, and that's where I end. And these are some of my publications that are germane to this. If you want to see any of them, they're on academia.edu. Thank you very much.